Hey everybody, thanks for joining us again. Today we're going to work on a song again for the Samson brothers, a band out of South Africa who has been very generous in allowing us to use their music for educational purposes, to demonstrate what we do, a day in the life. And today we're going to be working digitally, so we can have a very easy to understand way of how we approach our process, using examples, using our LMC plugin with IK Multimedia. This is the Lurssen Mastering Console Plug-In that Gavin and I designed with them some years back. It's modeled after our analog console, and this analog console is what I use almost every single day of my life and have been since I was a teenager. So this plugin is modeled after our formulas, our starting formulas, and I'm going to explain that, and not only explain that, but I'm going to use it and to show some examples about how I go about the process, and we're going to do some A/B comparisons and how we go down that road, and exploring some different roads we can also go down, but just basically opening up our world a little bit so you can understand how we go about our process step by step. So the first thing I'm going to do is listen to this mix down flat without any processing. So I'm going to bypass all the plugins, and I have a LMC here in the chain, just defaulted to its default preset, and also a Pro Q3 that is flat and has no processing on it, ready for our work. So both are in bypass. So we're just going to play this last section flat without any processing just to get familiar with what we're working on.
Taking me. It's all about timing. Finding what you want, driving on that 101 with the honey in the side and the mining. Yeah, let's take that again. It's all about timing and finding what you want, driving a nice car on the 101 with the honey, feeling like a rock star. If that's who you are, follow one goal from the start. Life comes with changes, yeah, don't be afraid to face it. If you want a better life, you go and chase it. And I want that good life.
Okay, cool. So this is actually very nicely balanced. It's a very open sounding arrangement, meaning that the elements within the mix, they're not compressed, they're not dense, they're open and they're reaching me. You know, you can hear the extension of those transients in the guitar and how the bass is supporting that guitar. It's percussive on the instruments, not with percussion, but they're actually hitting the guitar, it sounds like. So that is becoming the percussive element in the mix. And there's a lot of air around that. There's a lot of space that I'm hearing around that. And the vocal is nicely placed right in the middle of it all. There is one thing that I'm noticing, and there is a buildup in the lower area, maybe around 40 or 50 hertz. I'm not so concerned about where it is particularly. I'm more concerned about where it is and where my ear is going based off everything else in the arrangement. And that's important to note. I'm not so fixated on if it is 40 or 50. I'm just aware at this point that my ear is going a little bit towards the sub-frequency element of how he's probably hitting his hand on the guitar and how that is coupling with the bass. So my ear is going a little bit towards that area more than I'd like it to. In other words, it's distracting me to some degree from where my ear should be going, and that's the vocal. This is all very, very subtle stuff, and I'm also going to be anticipating how that mix, that raw flat mix, is going to be introduced to the processing that I'd like to introduce. So once that happens, that might be emphasized more. That low part of that 50-40 cycle type area might be emphasized a little bit more. So I got to watch out for that as I introduce my processes and make sure that that is not emphasized even more so. So here we go. I'm going to just work with the LMC for the moment only, and I'm going to explain how I'm going to introduce this. So the first thing I'm going to do is hit engage, take off the bypass. I'm going to create a little loop here, and I'm going to turn the input drive all the way down, and I'm going to turn it up until I feel like I don't want to turn it up anymore. That's step one. I'm also going to use pop rock as my starting point, which is going to have, when I click over to my module display here, a modern tube limiter right here, as opposed to a different preset, which I'll audition in a second also, which is going to have more of a vintage type tube limiter in the chain. So here we go. I'm going to gain it up here just using the input until I feel like I don't want to push it anymore. so right away, I felt really good as a starting point to go to -4.2. And that has everything to do with the amount of level that's on the mix itself. In other words, I could turn this down a tenth, the actual clip gain on the Pro Tools session down a tenth, and I could raise this down up a tenth, and I'd be relatively probably very, very similar places. I like 4.2, and I'll explain why. It feels open still. It feels like it's enough level, it's reaching me. I'm gonna back it off one more tenth and go between -4.2 and -4.3, and let's just explain and understand those differences and what they mean to us. So -4.3, you'll notice that it just doesn't quite reach me. It feels like it's just not quite there. And now to 4.2. Just feels better to me. I'm just feeling more connected to that music now. Back to 4.3, of course negative. Just doesn't quite fill up the space. And now let's go too far. Let's go to 4.1. Let's hear that. Now all of a sudden, although very subtly, it feels like the slap of that percussive element of the hand hitting of the guitar, it just feels a little bit tucked into the body of the music. It feels actually a little smaller. So let me go between 4.1 and 4.2, and you'll hear when I go to 4.2, everything will just bloom a little bit more, it'll expand a little bit more. 4.3, it doesn't feel like it's quite reaching. 4.1, it just feels like it's a little bit congested. 4.2 feels like maximum size. So I'm just gonna dance between those three places so you can experience that too. So very, very subtle stuff, but effective. And you can really key in on those subtle differences between what's too far and what's not far enough. Now, you could be misled, and you might want to go too far and then compensate with EQ. In other words, if I went to 4.2 or maybe even 4.0, I could probably get away with it, but I'd want to start brightening into that compression that's there. Because as I'm gaining up or down, consider this. This gain is going through all these processes post that gain in series. You're going through this EQ, both these EQs, this tube EQ, this solid state EQ, this tube limiter, this solid state de-esser, this solid state compressor, and some limiting post all of this on the back end that you can't even see, that's just part of the process. So as I'm gaining signal into all of this, they're enveloping, they're absorbing, they're hugging, and if I go too far, you'll see that it's actually darkening a little bit. 4.1 feels like the top end and the upper mids are sucking into that body of the mix a little bit, right? So I might need to then open up maybe some 3K and 6K to compensate for that if I was trying to achieve more level. But in this case, I'm not. I don't need to. I have plenty of level, and it feels really good at 4.2, so I'm going to keep it right there. Now, I'm on the pop rock setting, which utilizes this tube limiter here in the middle. I want to audition another different type of tube limiter just to see if it's better and it gives me another type of result. So what I'm going to do, for quick comparison purposes, is I'm going to hit duplicate right here. And now I'm going to have the exact same thing down here as I did, except I'm going to change this to Americana Loose. And you'll notice that I have more of a vintage type tube limiter here instead. Now I could have just alternated between the two and this gain will remain the same, but I kind of like having it on different tracks because I might want to do more than just that change to compare my end results. So let's just experience the difference between one tube compressor, one tube limiter in either signal path against the other. Again, this one up here will be the modern type, and the one down here will be the vintage type. And we can just hear the flavor and how they're reacting in the chain. right away I'm leaning towards liking this one, this pop rock setting versus the Americana Loose, because the bass is not holding as much with Americana Loose as it is with pop rock. So let me try a different one just to feel like I'm fully exhausting all options. I'm going to go to Americana Tight and see if that gives me a little bit more bass hold before I start EQing.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with the honey inside and the mind. Yeah. Let's take that again.
It does a little bit more, but not as much as I like the amount of bass hold that's happening on pop rock. Now, so I'm gonna delete this now because we're not going to use it. I just wanted to show you that as an example of what you can do to Audition. Now the bass isn't 100% on to me yet, but I like all of that bass that this pop rock setting is allowing for me to now work from. I can work off that bass and I can use that as this nice support to then open up on top, and that's exactly what I'm going to do next. So I have a few options here. I could use this 5-band EQ, which is a great 5-band EQ for broad strokes, or I could use any type of EQ into this plugin. And for getting a little bit more fine-tuned, I think I want to do that. So I'm going to open up the Pro Q3, and I'm going to boost somewhere in the middle, somewhere just to pop that vocal up, just to emphasize that vocal a little bit ahead of the low part of that bass, as I was explaining before. I could start cutting bass, I could start carving bass, but instead I want to open up, and it's going to do the same thing as cutting bass, but in a different way. So I'm going to start at 1K. I'm just going to type in 1K, and I'm going to start at a half dB, and I'm going to use the default Q of Pro Q3, which is a Q of 1, and we'll see where that takes us. So this is just a half dB boost at 1K into the LMC, and we're going to A-B that in and out.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with the honey inside and the mind. Yeah. Let's take that again. It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving a nice car on the 101.
So already I'm already moving in the right direction. It's helping that bottom end of the bass, and it's also bringing the vocal out ahead of that bass a little bit, which is pleasing to me. My experiences led me to this place very quickly, but I'm not done yet. It feels like a little bit low for me. So I'm going to raise that up just a hair to 1.7K, 1700 cycles, and I'm just going to A-B between the two and see if I like that better.
Timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with the honey inside and the mind. Yeah. Let's take that again. It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving a nice car on the 101 with the honey, feeling like a rock star. If that's who you are, follow.
And again, I feel like that's an improvement. It's just feeling, when I went right for 1K on the dot, it felt a little bit swallowed. The vocal just felt like it's a little bit like it doesn't quite have the breath that I wanted in terms of the open air aspect of it. So if I go a little bit higher, not too high, but a little bit higher to 1.7, you can A-B between the two. I'm just preferring that. Now you have to make sure that you don't get lost in this process, because it's easier to continue thinking that you're moving in the right direction by brightening and brightening and brightening, and all of a sudden you've gone too far. So as I'm brightening, my consciousness is also on the bottom end of the frequency spectrum, because I'm looking for a preferred global balance. Everything is working with everything else in terms of how all the elements are working with one another, and it just feels pleasing to me. It feels like it's inviting me into the track, and I feel more connected to the track for that reason. These are the things to go off of versus trying to wrangle something into place. And right now we're not in that situation. It just feels very musical and open to me. So I'm just going to go a little higher than 1700. I'm going to go to 2K and see if that's too much in terms of how far high we're going, and see if we're happier going back to 1.7.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with the honey inside and the mind. Yeah. Let's take that again. It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving a nice car on the 101 with the honey, feeling like a rock star. If that's who you are, follow.
So I'm feeling really good still about 1.7. Now this is entirely subjective, and you have to really key in on the bass and how the bass part of the frequency spectrum is interacting with the upper mid part or the mid part of the frequency spectrum, and how those things are either preferred or not. And you know, one person might have a different opinion than the other, but I think we can all agree that having this EQ in is better than not. Once I A/B it one more time before, with and without just this part of EQ into the LMC.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside.
Great. And then one big A/B with everything in bypass and then back again, so we can just experience how far we've come.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside and the mind. Yeah.
It's really great. And just to fine tune it, I'm going to try one more thing. I'm going to duplicate all of this again. And I'm going to, on this track, just take back the Pro Q3 just a tenth to 0.4 up. So this one below has 0.4 up, and this one above has a full 0.5 up. And we can just see if we prefer a little bit less of a boost. It's probably going to bring the bass back a little bit because I'm not de-emphasizing the bass as much by opening up the mids. So let's just experience that and see if that's better.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside and the mind. Yeah.
I still like it up, so I'm going to split the diff and I'm going to go to 4.5. And now we're talking about hundredths of a tenth. This makes a difference. It certainly makes a difference. So let's hear that now.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside and the mind. Yeah.
Kind of liking that. I'm really liking that because now the bass is really feeling big, bigger than even up here. So this is the type of thing to go off on. And then what I'll do, I'll literally go up here and I'll start zeroing in. Maybe I'll go to 4.9. And maybe this will feel a little bit too high, and the 4.5 down here is feeling a little better. And I'll zero in and narrow in until I feel like I've exhausted all options, and this is how I tighten the reins, or I'll kind of continually sharpening how the angle of my magnifying glass to get that pinpointed center that I'm looking for.
And finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside and the mind. Yeah. Let's take that again. It's all about timing.
So I think this should come up. Let's try 0.46.
And finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside and the mind.
All right, and let's try 0.47.
It's all about timing and finding what you want. Driving on that 101 with Donnie inside and the mind. Yeah. Let's take that again. It's all about timing and finding what you want.
4.8, let's try that. This is real life. This is how you do it. You just keep checking until you feel better about something. See how that the 4.9, I mean, this is such subtle stuff. It doesn't quite feel as full-bodied and open as 4.8. So let's just A/B between these two. Again, subjective, but I'm preferring this 4.8 boost. I'm going to delete this one now because this is now our favorite. And one more big A/B between ultimate before and after. You can highlight the track, hit Shift A to bypass all the plugins at once on the channel itself to give you an exact idea of what's happening.
It's all about timing and finding what you want.
So to sum it up, I'm happy with this balance. Now I'll go through the entire song and make sure that this setting holds or does not hold. I might need to do some automation to ride section to section in terms of my EQ and also my gain, but we'll have other videos exploring all of that stuff. But this is a good starting point for where I want to lead in terms of my general setting for this song. And if you think about it, it looks pretty simple, but it's actually pretty complex in terms of what's going on with these dynamic processes and what we're feeding into, because we're EQing into this dynamic process that is preset by Gavin and I as a good starting point to get you pretty far down the road. And you can work up against these dynamic processes and push up against these dynamic processes and also rely on them to give you a whole lot of information in terms of how far is too far and what it feels like to not go far enough as a great starting point. So I hope this helps out, and let me know if you guys have any questions.